Hello, today we are going live to talk about acceptance and commitment therapy in functional neurologic disorders. Acceptance and commitment therapy, also called ACT, and functional neurologic disorders, also called FND. Two of my current loves and obsessions, and we're going to dive into some research. We're going to give some practical things that you as a clinician or as a patient or as family can really use and take home. And if we haven't met, my name is Julie Hirschberg. I am a neurologic physical therapist and the owner, founder of re+active Therapy and Wellness. I'm in the Los Angeles area. Our clinic's actually in El Segundo, so a little beach town right outside of the airport in LA. And I have the honor to work with a team of PT, OT, speech therapists, psychologists, yoga therapists, fitness professionals, all in intensive and integrated programs for people like FND and dystonia and CRPS and concussion, stroke and Parkinson's, and so much more. So a lot of what I bring to these lives is what we're learning and doing together as a team. And this particular topic has been a hot topic because this was a theme in our last month of Brain Bites. Now, Brain Bites is a community for clinicians who work with complex cases, neurologic disorders, and we talked about psychological approaches that physical therapists or occupational therapists can bring into their therapy. And acceptance and commitment therapy is one of those things. So I want to preface this, especially when we talk about this with FND, by really saying acceptance and commitment therapy is a psychological approach that is not, how do I say this? It's really like universal. It's not specific to FND. It's not specific to trauma. So a lot of folks, there's like a myth out there that functional neurologic disorders due to psychological trauma or a psychiatric disorder, and that is not the case for everybody. And what I think is really cool about acceptance and commitment therapy is that that's not the point of it. The point of it is to not kind of like dig in and find trauma or treat something emotionally. It's really to help a person move towards things they love to do. And so I just think it's a really refreshing approach for people with functional neurologic disorders or chronic illness. And there are some key principles that we who are not psychologists, like myself, so I'm not a psychologist, I am a physical therapist, but PTs and OTs and speech therapists can incorporate these principles. So I want to talk about two different studies. So this is the first one, and this is a case series. So this is a very small study, like what we see in functional neurologic disorders. This was a case series of acceptance and commitment therapy for reducing symptoms in functional neurologic disorders. This was out of the UK, and this is, I'm going to say it's old, it's from 2017, and it is small. So this is 8 patients that they present as a case series where they did a brief interventions, just 6 to 10 sessions of acceptance and commitment therapy. And what I really love, so I love to tell you a little bit about the study and the purpose of them doing it. So I'm going to just stop sharing that for a moment. They talk about this idea that I love with acceptance and commitment therapy. It doesn't matter what diagnosis. And this is why they say this can be so helpful in functional neurologic disorders. It has no assumptions regarding the cause of functional neurologic disorder. And it places the emphasis on the experience of the person with FND. A lot of folks that I meet with who have FND, they have anxiety, because of the nature of their disorder. They have a disorder that's variable, it comes and goes, different symptoms might show up, and that causes anxiety. So not necessarily that the anxiety caused the FND. So this is a really important consideration, and I think a lot of folks that are referred to psychology for functional neurologic disorders, they're referred under the premise like your psychological dysfunction caused this movement disorder or is causing these symptoms. And while there is a trauma subtype of functional neurologic disorder, that's not everybody. It appears that at least half of the people with FND do not have that subtype. And so it's really actually inappropriate to be treating it that way. So acceptance and commitment therapy, that's not the purpose of it. It's not the purpose to kind of be digging in to see if somebody has trauma. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about what acceptance and commitment therapy is. And again, I'm talking about this as a physical therapist. This approach, which has been around for a while. It was pioneered by Stephen Hayes, and there were other colleagues who continue to evolve it. But it's based on this model of psychological flexibility, psychological resilience in a person, which with these 6 key pieces. So this is called a hexaflex model. Acceptance, cognitive diffusion, being present-minded. It's funny, I can't even read these, and probably means you can't either. I want to hit on a couple of these, particularly the ones that we can use very clearly in physical therapy, but values and committed action are another key component of this. I think it's really important to say that acceptance does not mean that you are ignoring things. I think that's like a misconception of this, that like, well, I'm just gonna accept how I am. No. It means that you're going to be in the present moment, and you're going to take action towards what you value in life so that you can live as fully as possible. And one of those key components, which this is like one of my favorite parts, because I think this really resonates. If you're a PT or OT, this really resonates. And I think if you're a person living with a chronic illness, which, by the way, I am a person living with a chronic illness. I have lived in fear of my symptoms. I have lived really focused on my symptoms and not necessarily focused on my values and taking action. So I have lived this, and I've also done a lot of therapy. So I'm speaking from that standpoint as well. But as a physical therapist, I love this because I think it really helps us frame what we're doing as well. So when a person, so in acceptance and commitment therapy, we want to collaborate with the person and work with them to move towards their values, towards an action that's in line with what they really love. So I'm a person, for example, that values my family. So I want to move towards doing things, being able to do things with my family, right? So you can see moving towards, that's unhooked, and I'll talk about that, like what that hook means. And then hooked actually moves away, and that hooked and unhooked is really based on symptoms, right? And so are you, and I'm going to bring up another picture here, which again, this one really resonated with me. Oh shoot, I don't have the picture. I'm so sorry. I thought I did. But when we presented this in Brain Bites, Dr. Lauren Keats, our neuropsychologist, shared this picture with the idea of diffusing. So the thought in cognitive diffusion is like we get maybe stuck in some of these like thoughts, right? And they become us. And we can defuse or become unhooked from those. So we could be hooked to those thought patterns, or we could be unhooked from those thought patterns. And that is the part of acceptance and commitment therapy that is called defusion. So you're defusing from those thoughts and instead moving towards those things that you value. So I mentioned, and so I'll just use myself as example. I live with an autoimmune disorder, rheumatoid arthritis. It can bring about really severe fatigue and pain in my joints. It can limit my mobility. An example of this would be like when I was first diagnosed, I would do anything to be out of pain, anything to not be so fatigued. And I was constantly working to do something about those symptoms. That is normal, by the way. And it's not saying that's a bad thing at all. But my whole life for a period of time was focused on that and not focused on those things that I loved and that I wanted to do and be a part of, be with my family, stay active, be running, all of those things. I was really, really focused on how do I get rid of these symptoms. It was really stressful. And also I just, again, want to say this is a very normal response to having symptoms. So that's not an abnormal response. There's nothing wrong with a person for having that response. Sometimes though, that gets you hooked and that takes you away from being able to do the things that you love. So this is an example of even a visual that could be helpful. I think as a physical therapist, I too was actually really trained in a way to try to fix somebody, try to fix their symptoms, try to get rid of those symptoms, get rid of pain, get rid of tremor, get rid of bradykinesia, slowness of movement. And it's not that we're not actually doing things to help ameliorate symptoms. However, as a therapist, and I'm being trained in that way to like fix everything, it's not actually very empowering to the person you're working with. It's actually disempowering to them, because as the physical therapist, then you're the fixer, you're the hero. And in reality, our patients, our clients are the heroes, and we're coming alongside of them to like figure things out with them and to guide. And I think this arrow going to the right, going towards, is a way that we really do that. It takes us as clinicians out of a fixer mindset and into an empowering, a collaborative mindset. That is the way healthcare should be, in my opinion, for sure. So I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to come back to this article. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background. So in this case series, they talk about, and again, I think this is so refreshing to the person with FND that maybe has been referred to therapy and has had kind of talk therapy or maybe CBT. Treatment and acceptance and commitment therapy is not focused on the control of unwanted emotions, or trying to find some like hidden truth. It really is about being with some of those hard things and moving towards your values and actions. I think that is lovely. I think it's a wonder in this case study or case series that people got better. This really aligns with a rehabilitation approach to FND. And that is all from the introduction to this study. So in this study, what they did, so again, very small, this is just a case series. They offered people 8 weekly or every other week, hour-long face-to-face sessions. people participated in 6 to 10 of those. So they extended if they thought it would be helpful. And then the outcomes were looking at how they used a work and social adjustment scale. So what the person was engaging in for work or socially. Clinical, they looked at clinical outcomes for anxiety and depression, as well as acceptance. Acceptance is an outcome of acceptance and commitment therapy. It absolutely is. For the clinicians out there, there's a really lovely table in this article that goes through the different aspects of like engagement and openness and awareness. And they actually give phrases and examples of how they use this, which I think is really cool. But bottom line, the folks that did this got better and clinically meaningfully better on those outcome measures, and didn't get worse. I think that's like another big thing that sometimes what we see is that folks with FND can actually get worse. And that's the case with other neurologic disorders, but these folks got better. So I give this example. This is an example of case series where acceptance and commitment therapy was used in folks with FND. They got better with this, but it was done by a psychologist, right? So I want to give an example, and there's a few of these, but I want to give an example. And this is outside of the world of functional neurologic disorders. But this is a really lovely example of physical therapists doing therapy that's informed by acceptance and commitment therapy versus usual care therapy. And this was in chronic low back pain. So I do want to say the studies using ACT with PT or OT are generally studied in pain. There is a lot of folks to study with pain. It's very, very common. Chronic low back pain, the most common. So you're going to see this the most. And this was a group, let's see. This was a randomized controlled trial where the physical therapists were trained in these principles, and they brought these principles into physical therapy. So I think this is really important. And I forgot to mention from the other study, I even wanted to quote it. Let me see if I can find the quote. This ACT, so acceptance and commitment therapy, may be best done in a multidisciplinary treatment setting as opposed to just with psychology for people with functional neurologic disorders. And this makes sense because FND is multifactorial. It's not just psychological. And these ideas, using them within PT, OT, speech, is just going to really amplify the effectiveness of treatment. And I would say, honestly, not just for FND, for any human, because it promotes the person engaging in life. Isn't that what we all want to do? So, in this particular study, they randomized people into usual care for low back pain, physical therapy, and this group that did this ACT-informed physical therapy. And these were for patients with low back pain, and they had 248 participants. So this is a much larger study. And these folks got better compared to usual care, especially at 3 months. So they followed them at 3 months and at 12 months. And their SF12, which is a very reliable source of kind of global function outcome, improved in these folks. And I think what's really noteworthy is that this included multiple areas: disability, pain, their function, work, and social activities, life satisfaction, like all of these things improved in folks compared to usual care. Now, I will say one caveat here, and I think this is a really important one, is that the group improved at 3 months. They didn't really maintain it at 12 months. And that's concerning, right? So this is something that I think is like really important to consider. I'm going back in here because this was not a very long intervention. So this was a very short intervention. It was 3 treatment sessions plus a follow-up phone call, a 20-minute phone call 1 month later. That is a great start. My guess, and some of their discussion too, was potentially you need more than 3 sessions to make a longer lasting change. So it's very rare that I see somebody for just 3 sessions myself, not out of the question, but I think this sets the stage for us including some of these ideas from acceptance and commitment therapy into physical therapy with some really great results and very feasible for the physical therapist to do. And actually there's been some nice studies in physical therapy students and other physical therapists experience using ACT, and that not only do they get better outcomes, they are also feeling less burnout. And I think this is really important. I have colleagues every day leaving the profession, and that is because it's hard. It's not our patients that are hard. Being in healthcare is hard. There's so many factors. There's insurance and like a lot of environmental external things that are outside of our control. I have felt this way many times as a physical therapist, just completely burnt out. And sometimes some of that can come from ourselves. And I have felt that, right? Like when I take on too much, for example. And I think the framework of acceptance and commitment therapy as a physical therapist actually really helps me not take on as much of the burden, really share and collaborate with the client in front of me and really empower them. That empowerment is the thing that to me makes all the difference for a patient. And being with them. I think the other thing that I want to say, which can be really hard as a physical therapist, sitting with a person in a really tough thing with really tough symptoms, or really like a lot of frustration or anger at them, at their symptoms, at their condition, at the state their life is in. A big part of acceptance and commitment therapy is that acceptance and acknowledgement that these are really normal and valid things for us to experience. Anger, frustration, sadness, disappointment, despair, all of these things are so normal and expected in a neurologic disorder or chronic condition, and not trying to like, okay, well, let's not talk about that, or let's move on, but actually sit with a person and acknowledge and validate that this is very real and normal. Like, of course, a person would feel that when they are experiencing the symptoms of FND. Of course, you would be frustrated and angry. It would actually be kind of weird if you weren't frustrated and angry about your symptoms. And I think that's a really beautiful thing about incorporating this as a physical therapist, as an occupational therapist, as a speech therapist. I didn't really get training in that. And I've sat with many and many of patients across my career and honestly didn't really know what to do with all of those things, and often took them home. And I think that this framework gives you as a therapist a way to be there with the patient And I will tell you, I actually had a patient one time share with me, she was like, I know physical therapists can do so many things, but the fact that you sat there with me and listened, like, that was worth $1 million to me. That hasn't happened before in a medical provider appointment. And that meant more to me. I'm saying this as a patient said this to me. That meant more to me than any other like technique or exercise or anything I could do. And that like really has transformed me as a therapist to be and attend to being with a person much more. And I think it's what we all need as humans, to be honest. It's all so very important. So I want to give you one other piece that I love, that as a physical therapist, there was another really nice little study. I didn't want to overdo it today and give you all these studies, but there's a really nice study in from the it's called the Back to Action program at Stanford. They have a pain program, it's physical therapy and psychology, and they use this analogy a lot across the team. So I think this is the beauty of ACT, is we can use this across the team. We can use this in a multidisciplinary integrated way. And this is the rope analogy. And Lauren Keats, our neuropsychologist, actually told me this is why they have like a tug of war rope in the psychology office, which I thought it was a dog toy. But she explained to me it's because we talk about this analogy a lot. And now I'm going to use this analogy a lot. And this was from Acceptance and Commitment Therapy for pain, but like insert any symptom there. Acceptance and Commitment Therapy for tremor, for weakness, for dystonia, like all of the things. It's very, very natural when you're experiencing a symptom to hold tightly. So if we consider this monster on the right hand side as like any of those symptoms, pain, tremor, dystonia, myoclonus, whatever it is very natural and in fact normal to hold on to that, right? And to really like struggle and fight it. And I'm telling you again, as a person who is living with a chronic condition, this is exactly how I attacked. Like, I'm an intense person. You probably know that. This is exactly how I attacked my rheumatoid arthritis when I was diagnosed. I was like, give me that rope. I'm holding on and I'm going to beat this thing down. Right. And hey, a little bit of intensity and motivation, not a bad thing. Not at all. But if we are holding so tight, we might just fall into the pit. I fell into the pit when I was diagnosed. I was a wreck and I was so incredibly stressed. When I let that rope go, which was maybe one of the hardest things that I did, my life changed. And not just like that, voila, the pain went away. No, like I had medication, I had therapy, I was doing other things. It doesn't mean we don't do those things. It just means that my nervous system, when I was holding that rope, the nervous system for a lot of us when we're holding that rope is ramped up. We're in a sympathetic state. We're fight or flight because literally we're fighting, right? And letting that go, which indeed, one of the hardest things. This is not like a simple, oh yeah, like I'll just let that go. No, not if you're kind of a perfectionist like me, not if you're kind of type A, not for a lot of people. It's just not necessarily natural for people to let that go. But if you look at the guy on the right, if he lets go, where does he go? He actually goes back to life. Maybe the monster actually falls in the pit. Hooray. But that's one of the analogies of that, like moving towards and letting go. It's not easy. I've been through this. I will be the first to tell you it's absolutely not easy. But it with a team, and this is, my own experience. I worked with physical therapy. I worked with psychology on my own health. And with a team, I was able to do this. It took me a while. Yeah, it wasn't my natural personality to do so, but it was extremely helpful and allowed me to live my life, be able to keep being a physical therapist. When I started, I actually took a leave off of work, and because I couldn't use my hands, I couldn't stand on my feet very well, and I was scared that I might not be able to go back, and I did. And I have had the pleasure of being alongside many people on their journey who get to go back, who get to do the things that they love, even with the things, right? Pain is a part of my life. Fatigue is a part of my life. Has it gotten a whole lot better? Yes. Is it still there? Yes. Do I still live and do many things that I love to do? Yes. And that's like acceptance and commitment therapy in your life. So that wraps up us talking about acceptance and commitment therapy. I hope that was really helpful for you. As a physical therapist, this was super helpful for me. And it's amazing to work along psychologists who use this as part of their approach. We're going to go into a question and answer. So, if you sent me a question, I have them here. I'm going to answer them. Feel free to put a question in the comments as well. I love it. I love your questions. And if you are signing off and want the links to the articles, want our other resources, comment newsletter on this recording. And we'll send you the links to join our very popular newsletter. We have one for patients, it's at reactivept.com, one for clinicians at reactiveeducation.com, and we put all of this stuff in our newsletter every single week, and you get it in your inbox every single week. So I want to answer some questions. Brilliant questions that people sent. So I love this question that Phoebe sent me. How to tell when it's FND or something else without overthinking it? Phoebe, brilliant question. Because you know what? Most of us are overthinkers. Let's just put it out there. Like, this is normal for us to be overthinking things, right? So thank you for acknowledging that most of us are doing that. And when you have FND and you have a new symptom, it's very natural to be like, what is happening here? Is this FND or is this something else? Now, I'm a firm believer that not everything is FND. I'm also a firm believer that it's not always helpful to pursue major medical workups for every symptom, right? There is a balance there between those two things. And I'm going to tell you first, Phoebe, this is like my personal approach, because I have a disorder that ebbs and flows and comes and goes. And I have learned to go, okay, this is a new thing, or this got worse. And I'm going to give it a couple weeks. Let's see where we're at, right? And now I am usually able to get out of bed and move through my life, right? And so there are certain things that are definitely emergencies, right? And to like all my clinician friends out there, we learn this like, you know, week 1 of therapy school, like what's an emergency? When are we calling 911? When are we going to urgent care? Like all of those things, right? And when it comes to neurologic disorders and having FND, that can be really hard to like discern. And so here's what I'll recommend for folks is to work with your healthcare team to go, to make a plan. Like if you have functional seizures, it's generally unhelpful to go to the emergency room with them. And so what is your functional seizure plan? And what symptoms kind of go over the threshold? Now, we would be here all day, or at least for a couple of hours, to go to go through a differential diagnosis of like, what is FND, what is not FND. But one of the biggest things that I'll look for is a variability, right? So it might come and go. It might change body parts. I will look for, does it change or shift with an external focus? So if I forcefully am thinking about doing a movement, I can't do it. But if I have a goal or an outside task that I'm doing, then I can do that movement. Those are two of the biggest things that I'll look for that will just remind me like, okay, this is my functional neurologic disorder. But I think the biggest thing is to take a pause and get curious about it. What's happening here? Is this something that I need to take care of, or do I actually just like need to take care of myself in the moment? That was a really beautiful question, Phoebe, and a nuanced answer. There's no black and white. The second question that I got here, and by the way, I see some questions coming in. So I was going to say, you could put some questions in the chat and I'll answer them. This is a beautiful question as well. There seems to be a lot of overlap with FND and chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalitis, ME/CFS. When do you know when the fatigue is functional? What a brilliant question. I don't think there is functional fatigue. So that's my like simple answer. At the same time, fatigue is multifactorial and it relies on several systems in the brain and body that interact and connect. And that way, is it kind of functional? Yes, it's like a connection issue. But fatigue has many different causes. And so we do see people who might have FND and ME/CFS, and we don't try to actually pull apart, is this fatigue from the FND or from the ME/CFS, because they all overlap. The autonomic nervous system is a big part of both of those disorders. The sensory system is a really big part of both of those disorders. Our energy management in our bodies, a big part of both of those disorders. Lifestyle pieces like pacing and sleep, stress management, a big part that could influence both. So in many ways, I don't think we need to try to figure out if fatigue is one or the other. I think what we need to really understand is what is underlying the fatigue for that person, right? And this is where I go back to the pie chart. If you hadn't heard of the pie chart before, this is the framework that we use to really understand what's underlying fatigue, what's underlying the person's FND symptoms, what might be underlying the ME/CFS, sensory, autonomic, physical things, lifestyle, psychosocial, motor control. These are all intertwined when it comes to fatigue. And so what we really need to do is apply a pie chart to fatigue. And I, as a person who has lived with really debilitating fatigue myself, an autoimmune condition, I can tell you fatigue can get better. There is hope. And it's not easy. It's multifactorial. I can tell you that from my personal experience. I can tell you that from the research, but I can also tell you that from many patients who have gotten back to life. Okay. Another really great question. A lot of like differential diagnosis, which is actually my love. Maybe none of these are really related to acceptance and commitment therapy, but that's totally fine. What are some positive clinical signs indicating FND versus another condition? So I talked about this just a little bit, and how do you know it's FND or something else? So variability in symptoms, like they change throughout the day, they change in different environments, they move to different parts of the body. So variability is a really, like that's probably the number one part of the clinical diagnosis. With different symptoms, there are different clinical tests that are both sensitive or specific to FND. I'm going to give a couple of examples. So for tremor, for example, Is it FND? Is it Parkinson's or essential tremor, or anything else, right? One of those biggest pieces would be the variability, but a second piece would be entrainability. A functional tremor is going to train to the rhythm of another body part. This is a positive sign. Other tremors do not. And there are clinically validated positive signs for every presentation of FND. Weakness, we have the Hoover sign, we have the hip abductor sign, we have the spinal cord injury test, for example. So weakness is a common one. So when you ask FND versus MS, I'm going to look at that history, the variability that's associated with it, and then I'm going to look at the symptoms. I'm going to do a neuro exam. So if we go FND for an MS, the neuro exam in MS is going to have clinical findings of like upper motor neuron signs like hyperreflexia, spasticity, weakness. It's going to be reproducible and not variable. And or there might be sensory loss in a central nervous system pattern. That's not the type of sensory loss that we see in FND. So another one that this person asked was, what about MCAS? Because we also see MCAS alongside FND, which, by the way, into the question about FND and MS, you can have them both. Right? And so you might have the neurologic clinical exam that's consistent with MS, and you might also have a neurological clinical exam that's consistent with FND. You can have both. That's what I typically see with MCAS. So we see folks, so we run a Zebra program for folks with hypermobility, dysautonomia, MCAS. And so we see folks in that. We see folks with MCAS who don't have FND, but we can see folks that have FND and MCAS. MCAS is mast cell activation syndrome, and there are, again, distinct clinical signs and tests for this. And where we could see some overlap is that there could be some variability in symptoms from mast cell activation because they are occurring due to mast cell activation, for which there are laboratory results, which are not always there, by the way. So I don't rely solely that somebody has had a positive laboratory test for mast cell activation to consider that it could still be mast cell activation without a positive lab result. And there we're looking at a pattern of things in response to a stimulus, and that stimulus could be medication, that stimulus could be something in the environment. Perfumes, such a big one with mast cell activation. So a really great question. Now, I saw some other questions up here. So what is the difference between functional neurologic disorder and functional movement disorder? So functional neurologic disorder is the umbrella term, and it includes things like functional movement disorder. So functional movement disorder, or FMD, is a subtype, and that includes a movement disorder. Tremor, dystonia, weakness, myoclonus would be examples of that. But other things also fall under the umbrella of FND. That could be functional cognitive disorder. That could be a functional dizziness like 3PD, functional sensory disorder. So we have many things that fall under the FND umbrella, which does make it hard to do research because it's very heterogeneous. And I see somebody also answered that. Somebody else shared, I've been having dissociative amnesia as a symptom, and it's been really scary, and it makes everything else flare. Yeah, of course that is a scary symptom, to have dissociative amnesia and not remember things from a dissociative episode. And the scare of that can flare other symptoms. I think that totally makes sense. And that can get better. Definitely seeing that can get better. Somebody else is saying, wait, you can you can have MS and FND, because that's how I was diagnosed. They ruled out MS first. They found a lesion. However, after consistent MRIs, the lesion never moved or anything. So I told it was benign. So again, I'm not giving medical advice here, and I'm not a neurologist, so I don't give a diagnosis either. But I will tell you, I teach neuropathology at the University of Southern California. I teach about the pathology of these diseases and how we as physical therapists can screen and figure this out. People can have more than one thing. It's very common. And MS has very, very clear criteria for diagnosis. It's based on the MRI, it's based on the clinical presentation, and you might have other testing like a lumbar puncture that supports the diagnosis. MS has very, very clear patterns on imaging. And so one lesion is usually not a sign of MS. However, they often will follow people, right? So this is a very confusing process for people when you have MS, because you have ups and downs of symptoms that can look very much like FND, but you can have both. I don't know if you have both. I do see a lot of folks that are misdiagnosed with MS. I've seen that throughout my career. I see many more that way than misdiagnosed with FND. And that might be, I work alongside some really fabulous neurologists that are really good at diagnosing. But I was sharing this to my sister the other day, whose coworker was concerned about possible MS. I would always go to an MS specialist neurologist for diagnosis, because they're the most up to date on the diagnosis, doing specialized imaging for it, and the clinical exam is huge. So really, really great comment. Thank you for sharing that. Another question, can neurogenic bladder be a part of FND? Great question. So bowel and bladder issues can definitely be a part of functional neurologic disorder. That's been documented. People with functional seizures can lose bowel and bladder control. Urgency, incontinence, constipation, like you name it, those can be associated with FND. They also can be associated with other things. And again, this is an important from a medical workup to look at. And if you have had other things tested and ruled out, you can, if this is a new symptom and you've had things tested and ruled out, it could be due to FND, right? I don't know for your case. I haven't worked with you. I haven't done all this screening. But if somebody developed a new symptom, again, I would look to see, is this a prolonged symptom? Is it variable? Is it related to other things? Bowel and bladder also have a very strong autonomic component. Dysautonomia or autonomic dysregulation is really common in FND. And so I would be measuring that. I would be looking at that. We'd be looking at heart rate variability. We'd be screening for the presence of dysautonomia and see if it's related to that. Or not, or is it FND? And again, I want to be really clear, when a person has FND, it doesn't mean every symptom is FND. It's also not helpful to live in a state of constant vigilance over symptoms. Fight or flight wreaks havoc on our brains and bodies. And we want to balance those things. We want to balance looking at things, getting things checked out, and also just being curious about them, right? Somebody else is sharing, my dizziness is 24/7 behind my head and chronic neck pain with this FND. Yeah, dizziness is common in FND, and associated neck pain makes sense. In anybody with dizziness, it makes sense to have neck pain, and those two are related. You got to treat the neck when somebody has dizziness, by the way, because when somebody is dizzy, they're like automatically going to start doing things different with their neck, and a lot of tension through the neck to keep them stable and to try to help control symptoms. It's just not very helpful in the long term because it causes neck pain. This is why you need a whole person approach when it comes to FND. And maybe I'll wrap this up here by really saying that that whole person approach might include portions of acceptance and commitment therapy. But if you have neck issues, we need to treat the neck, right? So acceptance and commitment therapy is not a magic bullet, but using that as part of your entirety of care, whether that's with psychology or a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, incorporating those principles, absolutely. And then, yeah, somebody else. Thank you. I need to come to your office. Y'all are welcome to come to Reactive. We love working with you. And by the way, easiest way to go to our website, reactivept.com, fill out an application. We look to see if you might be a good fit for our programs, and then come out and see us. I see another question here. What specialist is best to make a diagnosis? I've seen multiple neurologists specializing in movement disorders, and they can't help or diagnose me. So, very good question. One of the things that I would say for folks that aren't sure about the functional neurologic diagnosis or haven't had a positive diagnosis, meaning the person did testing where they did positive clinical signs, I would recommend seeing a neurologist that understands functional neurologic disorders. Now, for this person, they've already gone to a movement disorder specialist, and I think those are some of the best folks for understanding FND, but I've seen it in general neurology too, where they've been really good at this, but some are not in recognizing FND or recognizing when something is not, right? And so I think my best piece of advice is to look for somebody that does understand FND and can look at a broad picture of what's associated with FND. And there are, if you go to the FND Hope website, you can find a neurologist. And yeah, oh, hey, Mike, my friend and colleague and just incredible neuro PT is on here. He says, when a person has fill in the blank, including FND, it does not mean that that every sign or symptom is due to this condition. Thank you. Objective rule-ins, including the person. Yes, so I'm saying this about FND, but I'm going to say this about stroke. I'm going to say it about spinal cord injury, Parkinson's. Just because the person has a symptom of whatever does not mean it's their Parkinson's, right? Like the person with Parkinson's might also have FND. They might also have high blood pressure, right? Like there are so many things that are not just one diagnosis, right? And when you have one diagnosis, it doesn't mean everything is associated with it either. Yes, you're so very welcome. Thank you for the wonderful questions. And last question here, because I'm recognizing we're like coming up on an hour. It says, can ADHD make someone more likely to experience FND symptoms? Are they completely separate? This is a beautiful question. I just talked about this the other day. There is literature, not just in FND, but in other disorders as well, that ADHD might coexist with these things. It's not the same as them. ADHD is not FND. ADHD is not hypermobility, but there does appear to be things happening alongside of each other. ADHD and hypermobility, ADHD, autism and hypermobility, ADHD, autism and FND. ADHD, autism, hypermobility, and POTS. And what I will say is this is still being investigated. We need a whole nother couple hours to talk about this. What I find, and again, I do a lot of the consultations for our FND program where I meet people and we try to put together this pie chart and figure out what's happening for the person. When a person shares with me that they have ADHD, I then understand they have a neurospicy brain, not a neurotypical brain. It is spicy. It has unique sensory needs. It has unique autonomic. Homeostasis is different for this person in their brain, and not in a bad way. This is their wiring. And sometimes that person has not had their sensory needs met. Sometimes that person has not had autonomic and lifestyle needs met. Can that contribute to the development of FND? Possibly. Now, not everybody with ADHD has FND. So it's not a direct correlation by any means, but can it contribute? Possibly. Should it be something that we consider in our treatment? Yes. Are we trying to get rid of ADHD? No. It's actually quite a brilliant brain. I would not try to get rid of it. I would try to understand what that person and their brain and their body needs. Often they have sensory needs that their brain is wired for that aren't being met, and this becomes part of our holistic treatment plan. And I think it's really, really important for folks in treatment to go to providers that are neurodiversity affirming providers, not looking to change this really beautiful part of you and your being, but looking for ways to understand it and provide you the support and resources to live really successfully as you are. So I got like 3 of my soapboxes in on that. So beautiful, beautiful question. We'll have to do another live on this topic. Thank you so much, though, for joining me tonight, for hearing the research and all of those things. And again, I'm going to share these in my newsletter. I'll share the articles. It goes out on Fridays to clinicians and Mondays for patients. You can join once we post this. You can comment newsletter, but it's at reactivept.com if you're a patient, and it's at reactiveeducation.com if you are a clinician. Thanks so much for being curious, for just caring about learning and growing in these unique topics and helping people with some of the most misunderstood diagnoses. So thank you so much, and I will see you again soon.